Hi, everybody. I'm Daniela, and I'm really excited to be here in conversation with a great friend and artist. I had the opportunity to work with Leslie maybe like 10 years ago. And I'm from Mexico City, so I also saw her performing many different times over there. Leslie has, like a long practice of like 20 years we were talking about, which I think is really important to emphasize all this research and work that you have been doing for all these many years. And that time, when we collaborate together, we were with, it was with the collective Astrovandalistas. And I think some of the important things in that time, and also in general in your practice, is like collaboration, and it's something that also I'm very interested in my curatorial practice, but also like the use of technology, and also the fact that you are from Tijuana, from Mexico, but also like how the technology arrives there, and like even like the tools and the materials, like we could, if we see it in a very general way, we will think that the United States has like higher technology, but I think the fact to be on the other side of the border is that you have access to the old technology, but also the new technology. And I think all those things are connected in the conversation that we are going to have now. And I don't know, I was just thinking while we were seeing the performance, because it's so amazing, that maybe we can debrief a little bit about the performance, because I'm sure people will be interested to talk about that before like jumping into Beatriz, who is another amazing
territory.
Creative person. But yeah, maybe do you want to talk a little bit about the idea of medium, and maybe from there I can like guide us into the conversation.
Yeah, well, in some sense, like in a musical aspect, I'm trying to retake some of the work from Jorge Reyes, which is a really important musician and researcher from the 70s that was trying to put together, a practice of contemporary electronic synthesis in the UNAM laboratories, but at the same time, practice in field recording in different areas of Mexico. So I find that it was like a halfway project, because it ended very quickly. So part of what we do at Interspecifics is to retake some ideas from the 60s, from the 70s, in the sense that we find ourselves as a new wave of cybernetic researchers, but from the perspective of the electronic arts, instead of that from science practice itself. But there is no difference or distance in between doing artistic research or scientific research for us. It's like just the pursuit of gaining knowledge on the phenomena. And in this case, medium is this retaking of the idea that sound is a sort of a bridge in between words. So it opens doors for other spaces, but at the same time, there is a lot of research around sound synchronization in brainwaves. We are like looking for techniques to hack ourselves since all the time. It's like the archaeological evidence is like we're always been trying to interface ourselves to other realities. And medium is about this process of interfacing by using this series of stimulus to take us wherever everyone needs to be.
Yeah, and I think that's a characteristic of your practice of like digging in, like kind of like conducting the conversation into the idea of media archaeologists. And also, I think the fact to look into the history of electronics and science and art, it's something that we were talking about. It's like a conversation. It's not just about looking into the past and working with the past, but it's actually continuing. This is like technology is something that is continuously having different updates and approach it in different ways. But like your practice kind of traces that. Like we very well those histories, and you're interested in those histories, but like in a continuation of the past. And maybe it will be interesting to talk about, this idea of media archaeologists, but also it's not only media archaeologists. I think it's part of your art practice. Of like why you are like, and your collective are very interested in the past, but not only the knowledge that has happened, but like really weaving it in the contemporary moment. Maybe you want to start?
Well, actually, yesterday we were having this conversation, and I was like, you know what? I think the first media archaeologist project we did was actually this one. It is called Pulsum Plantae. But media archaeology is about, unveiling the practice of other electronic artists, because we are in a time where electronic is evolving such a fast velocity that is impossible for a piece from, 20 years ago to continuously be, active at this point, because it's other kinds of computers, operating systems, and so on. So part of what we do is like try to trace the technology that was used in that moment and the moment of creation, and upgrade it for contemporary functionality. So you can continue experience those pieces, but with today's technology. Mm-hmm. And in the case of this piece in particular, it's a remake, in a sense, of a process of research from Cliff Baxter, who's the creator of the polygraph. Mm-hmm. So the thing they used to detect lies. And it's a very funny story, because the guy was in his laboratory and was a big plant fan. So he has plants all over the place. So one day he just let the machine on, and when he came back, it was a full roll of paper detecting electrical activity. Mm. And the guy was like, why? There is nothing with a brain in this room. And then he was like, but it's these living plants. Mm-hmm. So he started to do experiments on the plants. Okay. And even though they don't have a proper brain, the way they're connected, the growing pattern is very similar to a neural path. Okay. And it's also a fact that bioelectrical activity it's one of the characteristics of living organisms. So we decided to take over the last piece of hardware he left and create a new one, make it open source and available for the general community to be able to explore their own pieces. And it was very interesting, because this project was a lot of, crowdsourcing, mm-hmm. because every time we teach at a workshop about it, it was a full workshop session. So the project was alive for 6 years. So we have to decide, thank you very much, but it's enough. We have to continue to the next, because it was the first time I have this experience that the project goes beyond your own, mm-hmm. Agency. It has an agency of their own. So there was like a first approach to this idea of media archaeology.
Yeah, and I feel like that digging into other knowledge, and you were pointing out before the ancestral knowledge too, it's like a really important part of of your practice. And I think that connects also with Beatriz da Costa, who she would talk about un-disciplinary in terms of like, working with the different, it's like interdisciplinary, it means like working with the different disciplines, but also the idea of un-disciplinary is kind of like getting out of the category of disciplines. And I feel like that allows you to actually get into different fields. And I think your practice goes in so many directions in those terms, like that allows you to weave that. And then maybe we can talk about this one.
Talking about transdisciplinary or intradisciplinary, which is the new, Karen Barad and Andrew Pickering, all these philosophers that came from science and are thinking about the intra-relations. But there is also this other trend about ancestral technology, and this is from Brazil mainly, a philosopher Fabiana Bojorquez, who created this concept, techno-shamanism. And techno-shamanism for us it's a very important practice because it's the way we sort of explore the past of Latin American technology, but very specifically in terms of musical instruments. So we did a series of data interface sculptural or installation pieces. This one, for example, we are using cultruns, which is a ceremonial drum from the Mapuche culture. And some years later, we created a version that is called terrestrial ensemble. And this was after the 2017 earthquake in Mexico City. So, for example, the idea of this drum is that it's a feminine drum. And it was used for ceremonies that were related with some sort of like feminine qualities. So it's dark in sense, the unknown, all those spaces were connected to this drum. And our exercise was to plug the drums as an ensemble to the data of the National Seismological Center and use the seismological data as a sort of like a living score created by the planet. And you have a continuous sound playing that is correlated to the events, like a small motions, they create very quiet and little hits into the drum, but it was something bigger than a pattern, 4x4 pattern will appear, or a 3/7 pattern, depending on the data we were receiving. So for that, we also needed to create a machine learning system to translate those terrestrial activity behaviors into a drum sequence. And then there you have, seismological science and musicology, and so robotics in some way, but a wooden robot, which is funny. But yes, it's like a process of interconnecting different strategies to get something that is poetical and expressive by their own means,
Yeah, totally. Even like just thinking in terms of the traditional archaeology of looking into the artifact and just like presenting this drum that it was from the past, but it's not. We all know that it's not from the past. There's like a lot of indigenous people in Mexico and all Latin America and all the world. I think like also it would be very interesting to think about if you can tell us a little bit about how you think these artifacts, because that's how we're working with Leslie with the artifact of Beatriz, but we'll get there. But
well, it's a research process, right? You first have to learn what was the meaning first of the artifact, then the way that used to work, and the probable scenarios where it was used. So it's like going into a very deep, like understanding with the system in order to make it work again, and it also like in the play of meanings. For example, this piece in very specifically the space that was presented, which is ex Teresa, an old church, and churches there mainly play Baroque Catholic music, like a very specific kind of music. So in a very subtle way, we made an act of decolonialization by taking the indigenous music back into this space. Yeah. So it was also, like this interplay of where do you use the object and what's the meaning when you change the object from its original position to another space.
Yeah, and I think the fact that these drums that are now being living by itself, but they are like being played by the system that you create, or basically the machine. I found very interesting, like how we are connecting with the objects and the technology, and it's more like a relationship rather than like tools. I think that's like very important in like how these drums are basically performing. Like it's ancient technology, ancient living technology, connected with contemporary learning machine. I found like very interesting this thing, and you were talking also before about bridges, and I think this is what is in this place. And yeah, it's just also very fascinating that it's in the church in Mexico. We have the fortune to have these spaces as also art spaces, not all Catholic spaces. So bringing that the radical push also that you were saying is a trend, but also like it's a push that has been like indigenous people has been working on to arrive into this. I feel like now we can do more about these topics. Now we do land acknowledgement, and that connected with the practice again of Beatriz da Costa, who was born in 1974 and passed of cancer in 2012. You and I have analyzed her trajectory and her artistic practice, and at the end of her life, when she has cancer, she was exploring different technologies, but then she was starting to look into other alternative knowledges. And I don't know if you can talk in those terms of like how now I feel like we have more tools to actually be able to do this drum than before.
Yeah, like in a way, it's because we own it to new materialism, Like new materialism is this philosophical space that is taking back the power to animistic knowledge. And the thing was that on the rise of modernity, everything that was not, like a logical, white, clear, systemic system, it was not allowed in modernity. So they create in linguistic terms this label of animism, and put everything that was outside their understanding there. But with this, like a rising of consciousness about our own original cultures and their practices. And for example, for us, the idea of observing other organization as bacteria, plants, and these other things that are outside the the Western logical preconceptions, you start realizing that there was a lot of knowledge that was left apart because we didn't manage to reveal it in a more collective way. Yeah. And because of that, like, quantum physics is taking us there in a way. It's talking about, particles that are interconnected and they have like a sort of relationship, and then sensibility and other kinds of organisms. But when I realized this, I thought to myself, like, this is not the first time I heard this. Actually, the first time I heard this was because of my grandmother, because of the community of my grandmother, and all these elder people talking about how intelligent a tree can be, and how complex is Mother Earth and things like this. So in Beatriz's work, I think the circumstances of their own health took her into a position of openness that was beyond her own imagination at the beginning, because you can see the process of getting into one very Western mindset to a more open space.
Yeah, totally. And I think maybe I'll start to talking a little bit about Beatriz. How are we on time?
We are terrible on time.
Okay.
We're finishing. Sorry.
Terrible. How many minutes?
Maybe if you can have the project and then open if anyone has a question.
Okay. Perfect. So we were like trying to frame or trace this idea of media archaeologists digging in the past, technology, because Leslie has been helping us in this project on disciplinary tactics, Beatriz da Costa, which Juan talked a little bit about it, about the exhibition. And Beatriz da Costa was a very important artist, I think, in the United States and also Latin America, because Leslie and we knew about her, and I had the opportunity to do a small interview with her before she passed. And mainly her also idea of technoscientific experimentation include community knowledge that in that moment and still is being called about citizenship knowledge. I like to call it more community, since there's a lot of like border and immigration politics here in the U.S. I'm not a citizenship, even if I live here and pay taxes. But, like she was talking about community knowledge, looking into alternative knowledge, technology, working with scientists. And then in this project, Pigeon Blog, as example of her practice, she worked, basically this, she called it, it's like a grassroots scientific data gathering, the Pigeon Blog. And basically she collaborated with homing pigeons, who are the pigeons that are able to go back to home. Like you can release them in certain areas and they go back to where they were born. And the collaboration was with them, a group of scientists, environmental scientists, and also community. And what she did was create this little backpack that has a sensor that measures the pollution of the areas where the pigeons were released. This was, Donna Haraway has wrote about it. So many people, it's one of her more important projects. And we are doing a show about her practice. But her practice is connected with technology and performing too. And for us, it was very important to have Leslie in the team for her to help us understand that technology and then put it back into the present and activate these important artworks. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about your experience with the backpack.
Yeah, just really quickly. So
I know, I feel like
I just have to say, like, in today's technological world, we have a lot of kits to measure almost everything. But in that time, when they made it, it was a very pioneering work because it was not that easy to create. It's some sort of something we call Internet of Things. So it's basically interfacing, transmitting data, and letting people know what's going on with the amount of, pollution in the earth. And this whole idea of citizen science, it's crucial to the process of the project she put together, but also the idea of interspecies collaboration. Because here pigeons play a super important role, because instead of using drones, which were not that popular in that time, it was more an ongoing process. Pigeons have a history of carrying little cameras on their chest since the, beginning of the century. So it was like a very intelligent connection they made. And the electronics is a whole thing. It's like they were really doing very high tech technology, low weight, in a moment where it was not that simple to have micro lithium batteries. So it's amazing to see their ability to put this together, her capacity to organize a whole group in order to put this idea into reality.
Yeah, and I think also just like to add into the idea of the project was like this measuring the pollution of these specific areas. That data will go into a blog, because in that time the blogs were like the important, no? And then they were like trying to connect it with Google Maps. So it's like really, for me, something very important about this project is the autonomy, that it doesn't belong to the university, even if she was part of UCI University and the Arts Computational and Engineer program, and two of her students collaborate with her. And this was 2006, 2008. And it was just so important because it was like an autonomous project in terms of like you generate your own data. You don't ask the government, you don't ask the university, and you collaborate with the community and also with the animals and the pigeons. So like it's not only like using tools, but it's really like they are part of our environment. So this is like a interspecies collaboration. So maybe we can talk a little bit about data, because you use also a lot of data, and also the performance was also connected with that, and how maybe just like how you are imagining now the data that we are going to be collecting. So the idea is that in 2024, once we have the show, we're going to have the performance. And I call it performance because it really, she also wanted to talk about Pigeon Blog. It's about collecting the data, but also that performance create awareness, and people start talking about the problem of pollution in specific communities also. And then so we are going to be releasing the pigeons in different areas, specifically here in Hollywood because Lace is here, and East LA and South LA because our community of color that has been, attacked in many ways, but also like in terms of environmental justice, there are communities that has been fighting, that have a history of fighting. And so we are going to connect with that knowledge. It's not that we are arriving there. So I don't know if you want to talk about how you're imagining that.
Yeah, it's just like a simple process, like trying to imagine her in today's world. So if in that time it was Blogspot, today we have Twitter and we have Instagram and we have other generation of social networks that if you take over those networks instead of putting just commercial data, you can actually use them as a channel for social communication. So it's important in the sense that we live in a moment of big data. So everything is collecting and generating data, but she was doing it before it was actually a matter of capital, because data has a value in this moment, not only in general sense, but also for scientific research and many other spaces. So I think it's just like trying to go into her shoes in a way and observe the technology today and take over that technology, because that was part of his work, like some sort of media activism also.
Yeah, totally. And just maybe to close and open to the public, just thinking in like the I want to emphasize the process of working with the artwork of Beatriz da Costa, who passed, and is also an amazing artist that was very loved. And there's like a lot of collaborators around her. So like the process of doing this exhibition is really connecting with all this network of people around her too. And then but like having Leslie, the creative part has helping us like really imagine this and make it happen, right? So we have just kind of like for you to know that we have been working with all her collaborators to arrive to this point. And the exhibition is not about historicizing her work. It's about like bringing her work and continue the conversation. And I feel like that's what your also practice is. And that's why it was so important to bring Leslie in. Also because she's also being an artist from Mexico. Beatriz, she was born in Germany, but her dad was from India. Her mom was German, and then she came to the United States to study at Carnegie Mellon in the program of robotics and arts. That also it was like an important moment, I think, in the history of arts and technology. That's where she met Steve Kurtz from Critical Art Ensemble, and then she came to Southern California to UCI to inaugurate a program called Arts Computational and Engineer that it just lasts a few years. But it was like really, I think she also was part of an important generation, and also as a woman artist like you. And like sometimes we just leave that histories into the United States, but it was important to bring an artist like Leslie to bring, this is something that is influenced into Latin America, and Latin America also influenced back into this project. So I think there's so many things, but I'll just open it to the public.
We're going to leave it there.
Yes.